Well, good morning, everyone. We're here today to respond to the Supreme Court's ruling on the Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8. We believe the court got it wrong on these rulings. The court's activist ruling on the Defense of Marriage Act ignored the votes of a bipartisan majority of Congress. This is a dangerous precedent which strips power away from Congress with respect to defining national marriage policy. We must work to defend the rights of Americans to make marriage policy. Additionally, the Proposition 8 ruling is a loss for the millions of Americans who have gone to the ballot box to voice their support for marriage between one man and one woman. California's governor and attorney general who refused to defend the people's wishes abandoned the people of California. It is a loss for democratic self-government. With the Supreme Court denying them standing, they have left the people voiceless. While California has silenced the voices of their citizens, the Supreme Court has not created a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. 38 states have affirmed the belief of their citizens that marriage exists between a man and a woman and is a necessary building block of stable society. The debate over marriage will continue, with the states leading the way. We must work to defend the rights of Americans to make marriage policy. We should work to promote the truth of marriage between a man and a woman. It is wise policy to uphold the reality that every child deserves a mom and a dad, and society as a whole benefits when they do. And now we have some statements by some of our other members here. First, we have Steve Scalise from Louisiana.
Thank you, Vicki. It's a sad day when unelected judges change the definition of marriage and turn their backs on the will of voters and their elected representatives who have made it clear that we want to continue to maintain the tradition of marriage as the union between a man and a woman. And far from resolving this issue, all that this ensures is that now the definition of marriage will be fought out in courtrooms by unelected judges as opposed to state legislatures and here in Congress, where ultimately elected representatives instead of unelected judges should be making those decisions. So the issue is far from resolved, but unfortunately it creates a lot more chaos than we had before the DOMA law that was passed by a bipartisan coalition of Congress was in place.
I'm John Fleming from Louisiana. I'd just like to comment first on marriage itself. Marriage is a fundamental building block of our civilization. It precedes this nation itself. It's the fiber that keeps our civilization so strong, and certainly it's the ideal model from which we raise children. That is, a marriage bond between one man and one woman. With regards to the issues at hand, today's decisions, I agree. I think that the Supreme Court got it wrong. It's surprising that the Supreme Court, in the case of Obamacare, a bill that was passed purely on a partisan basis, unpopular, and somehow the Supreme Court had to make that constitutional. In the case of DOMA, the Supreme Court bent over backwards to find a way to make it unconstitutional, even though it passed on a bipartisan basis and has been very popular. The good part about DOMA that we find is that the 38 states that currently do not recognize anything but traditional marriage are not forced to recognize anything that they themselves do not, through their own laws, deem to be appropriate marriages. So this is, I think, a good starting point to work from here. Thank you.
I'm Congressman Joe Pitts from the 16th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. I cannot disagree more with today's Supreme Court decision. Congress was well within its rights to define marriage as it has been construed for thousands of years for federal purposes. DOMA did not dictate to the states, but now the Supreme Court wants to dictate to the American people what elected legislators can do regarding federal law. And I want to personally thank Speaker Boehner for defending the House of Representatives and the democratically passed law. The people of California voted in a fair and free referendum to protect traditional marriage. Their rights were compromised when state officials abdicated their responsibility to represent the people. In both of these cases, the people acted through the democratic process to define marriage as between one man and one woman, and now see their decision invalidated by the court. The majority got it wrong in both cases, but they didn't take the even more radical step of redefining marriage for every state. I believe today's decision will have negative consequences for children who are best raised by a mom and a dad. We redefine marriage at the expense of strong families, the essential building block of our society. And if Tim Holskam's here, he's next, or Scott Garrett.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And I am Scott Garrett from New Jersey. It has been the precedent throughout our nation's history that a court decision cannot decide moral questions for the American people. We must not forget that our Constitution established a government of we the people, and the people, through their elected officials, have the final say on such matters. The court, therefore, obviously got it wrong in both cases, in Prop 8 and in DOMA. In Prop 8, the debate regarding the definition of marriage should not be in the hands of the courts. Instead, it should be returned where it rightfully belongs, with the people. The institution of marriage should not be manipulated either by the courts, who are unelected, nor by elected officials who have failed to uphold their responsibilities. In the DOMA case, the court's failure inappropriately, therefore, leads to states dictating to the federal government on various policy. And obviously, in that case, the courts got federalism wrong. Regardless of the Supreme Court's ruling today, ultimately, decisions such as these rest in where? In the hands of the people, and the debate over marriage policy will and should continue. And with that, I yield now to Mr. Wahlberg, Michigan.
Congressman Tim Wahlberg from Michigan. In my state, we have clearly defined marriage to be that relationship between a man and a woman. Nowhere have we defined what a love relationship is, what a relationship is in any case. We have not said that those relationships can't continue, but we've said that for the best interests of society itself, and more importantly, to make sure we understand that the desires of adults are not more important than the needs of children. We have defined marriage to be that relationship between a man and a woman for the best interest of those children. It's also for the best interest of society, because without the designed building block of a marriage, of a man and woman coming together, society itself is at risk and cannot continue. And so I believe that the bad decision, the wrong decision of the Supreme Court today on these two cases, taking away the authority and the right of the people, taking away the voice of the people, will only continue the debate that goes on, and it will probably be good for our country. As we look at what works and what is best for our children, and goes away from just declaring our needs to be the most important thing, and saying, how can we do best for those that are counting on us for the future? I appreciate standing with my colleagues here today, and I appreciate standing with our states who will debate this issue and decide this issue. And now it gives me a privilege to turn over to Randy Weber of Texas. Excuse me. Doug LaMalfa has come in, so Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon. Well, besides the ideal that marriage has been debased by this decision, and that's the moral fiber of our country is affected greatly by this the long term, we have seen that this is going to mute the people's voice. As a California legislator, I've lived in the state legislature as a citizen as well. Now, when as a federal legislator, we see this happen today. One thing that comes back to my mind is when you're out there on the street and you're talking to people, you're campaigning, going to door, a decision like this makes the people's voice muted, and people say, why should I even vote? Because a court's going to wipe away the decision I've made. And so that takes away the faith people have even in the system, as well as when they see their elected officials like an attorney general in California that refused, because of politics, to defend what the people had done. Not once, but twice in California. Prop 22 before, and then Prop 8 more recently. When politics enters into it and they say, we're not going to defend what the people have to say, then they find out that they have no standing in court because no one will stand for them. They don't have the right legalities. Their faith is completely eroded in the process. So this is a very bad decision for families and as well as the legal process and the voters, the people's faith in their government. So where do we go from here? I don't know. I don't think it ends here because I believe that they won't be satisfied with this decision. They'll now want to go on and force their way into people's religious freedoms and see that churches may have to perform things that they're against within their institutions. And so I don't know where it does end, but I do know it's a sad day for America.
Thank you. I'm Randy Weber from Texas 14, and I'm extremely disappointed in the Supreme Court's decision again. I might simply say that it seems to me that they are in collusion. The Supreme Court appears to be in collusion with the president and his Injustice Department when they decided to not defend DOMA, that they could selectively enforce whatever laws they felt like they wanted to. Unfortunately, it's been at the expense of children. Marriage is the government's least restrictive way to provide a good upbringing for children. It's also going to be at the expense of the religious institutions. I believe that this is just one more attack on one of the deep abiding institutions of American society. You'll recall that President Washington said morality and religion were two of the pillars of the foundation of our country. And once again, we see a Supreme Court that seems out of control, that will override voters' wishes, as my colleague Doug LaMalfa said, and institute their policy in its place. It's a sad day in America indeed. We need to decry the Supreme Court's decision. We need to make sure that we stand up for the least protected amongst us, those children whom statistics will tell you that have the best chance of growing up and being productive citizens in a normal family with a mother and a father. That's what's best for children. The Supreme Court has ignored the needs of children. They've ignored the wishes of American voters, and I will remain committed to fighting this decision, to being a part of the discussion that will be ongoing and seeing that states' rights are upheld, and we continue to promote this great American society that we have, which is built on those two pillars. And now I'm going to yield to my good friend from Texas, Congressman Louis Gohmert.
Thank you, and Vicki, I appreciate what you've done putting this all together. It is a sad day. Some may try to brand us hateful. This is not a hateful group. This is a group that has love and compassion for our country. And when you know that the president, now we know that he went to a debate with Rick Warren, a very informal one, and he abandoned what he had been saying previously about homosexual marriage and support for it, and said what he knew he needed to say in order to get elected. And now, after he has won a second term, and actually before he won the second term after these years, he comes out and says something different. We have an attorney general who has come before our Judiciary Committee and lied. Either lied to us or lied to the court. And now we have a decision today that includes, it has to include for their decision to stand, a lie. At page 22 of the Windsor decision, these 5 new holy quintets say, the principal purpose is to impose inequality, not for other reasons like governmental efficiency. They know that's a lie. They are very smart individuals. They know that's a lie. They know that was not the principal purpose. It was the very purpose you've heard my friends up here cite. I read the Windsor decision first before I read the Prop 8 decision. I was very disappointed with the intellectual dishonesty, but I knew for the court to be consistent, since they said that members of Congress basically would have a standing to defend a law that they passed, which gave the Supreme Court the authority to strike it down, well, at least on the Prop 8 case, they would have to say those who pushed through this referendum, the people that pushed it through and passed a referendum, the voters, they would have to have standing in order for the court to be intellectually honest and consistent. And they would have to say they had standing, and they would have to cite all these same provisions they did in Windsor that says the state has total authority to decide what marriage is in that state, in essence. But then you read the Prop 8 decision and you find they were intellectually dishonest and intellectually very inconsistent, because they then struck down the party as having standing that actually passed the referendum. So dishonesty, inconsistency, and for them, I mean, I don't know what kind of cloistered walls this court has been behind for them to make the statement at the bottom of page 13. For others, however, came the beginnings of a new perspective, a new insight, because they just said marriage between a man and a woman no doubt had been thought of by people as essential to the very definition of that term and to its role and function throughout the history of civilization. But apparently they've been very cloistered. They were not aware that the most wise man in history, Solomon, said there's nothing new under the sun, and this isn't new, and it's been tried over and over, and it's usually tried at the end of a great civilization. So just in closing, I would remind you of the document that allowed the United States to claim its independence and be free as recognized by England, the Treaty of Paris, 1783. And if you will look at that document, you will see big, bold letters at the very top. Because put yourself in the place of the Americans. What would you make Britons swear under that they would be so afraid to go back on their word? What would you make them swear under that document that required England to recognize our independence? Well, what our founders came up with were these words: in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity. That's why it started that way, and they did not believe that even the adversaries in war would have the nerve to go against that. What we now have today is a holy quintet who goes against the laws of nature and nature's God, and that's very unfortunate.
I'm Michelle Bachman from the 6th District of Minnesota, and today's decisions are offensive on so many levels, but primarily because we are a nation of laws, not men. We're a nation that exists under the concept of limited government. What the Supreme Court ruled today was on the basis of equal protection. And yet, in one of the greatest ironies in this decision, they denied equal protection to every American in the United States. How did they do that? Because they undercut the people's representatives when they voted on the Defense of Marriage Act in the first place. The people were duly represented. They represented the will of their constituencies, and the Supreme Court today undercut the equal protection of every person who elected their representative. They did it even more so, even more personally in the California case, where voters directly went to the polls and cast their vote. By the way, the same year that they voted to elect Barack Obama president, they voted to define marriage as between one man and one woman in the state of California. But the Supreme Court denied the equal protection, the right of that vote, to every Californian. This is historic, because you see what the Supreme Court is saying is they're asserting the supremacy of the court over all three branches of government. They're saying we do not have three co-equal branches, the executive, the Congress, the court. We have the Supreme Court. And so you have 5 individuals on a court who have decided that it is their morality or immorality, their view of morality or immorality, which must prevail. 5 people. Is that a denial of equal protection? And now we have an effective oligarchy of 5 who decide what the most fundamental issues of our day. You see, we are becoming a nation that our founders would no longer recognize. Because as a nation that exists under the rule of law, as limited government, that means that we as member of Congress, we can't do anything we want. We are constrained by Article 1, and specifically by Article 1, Section 8. We are constrained. The executive is constrained by our Constitution. And let this be a news flash to the Supreme Court. They, too, are constrained by our Constitution, though this decision belies the Constitution. You see, every time the Supreme Court meets, it's then another constitutional convention because they say it is. I believe that the people are more important than the Supreme Court. And I do believe that the people will have their sway. This decision is one that is profound because the Supreme Court not only attacked our Constitution today, they not only attacked the equal protection rights of every citizen under our Constitution, they attacked something that they have no jurisdiction over whatsoever, the foundational unit of our society, which is marriage. That is something that God created. That is something that God will define. The Supreme Court, though they may think so, have not yet arisen to the level of God. And so we are here today standing foursquare in support of our Constitution and for the institution of marriage. Now yield back.
Tim, did you want to share a few things?
Thank you, Congresswoman Hartzler. Congressman Tim Hillskamp from the state of Kansas, and apologize for walking in a little bit late and hopefully will not repeat things. One good thing out of the decision, the court did not declare there's a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Much of the decisions were illogical. On one hand, the state of Kansas will be able to maintain its marriage amendment, which I helped author a number of years ago. At the same time, the voters in California, 7 million voters, have been overruled essentially by the court's ruling. But what I'm afraid that gets lost in this discussion is that a narrow radical majority of the court has substituted their personal preferences on marriage for the will of voters and their elected representatives here in Washington, D.C. And those who are hurt the most, in my opinion, are the children of America. Because very clearly, every child in America deserves a mom and a dad. And with this attempt to redefine marriage, using the courts because they failed in numerous other cases, I think those that would hurt the most are our children. Decades of research, centuries of human experience indicated a stable marriage is the best thing to raise our children. And I fear for their future. I will be working with my colleagues for a response to this. I think we have some options in order to do so. And again, a very sad day for the children of America. And I yield back.
Thank you for being here today. This concludes our opportunity here to share with you today our thoughts. So thank you very much.
It's not a press conference if you don't take questions. No questions? None.